Most high-stakes decisions don't fail because people don't understand the situation. They fail because nobody moves.
Leadership today isn't just about scaling. It's about navigating constant uncertainty, market disruptions, and high-pressure decisions. If you're dealing with chaos, bottlenecks, and relentless pressure, welcome to the Business Emergency Room.
Welcome to the Business Emergency Room. Today, I want to talk about high-stakes decision-making. High-stakes decision-making used to be something reserved for very specific roles or maybe specific industries. And most businesses would maybe have one or two high-stakes decisions in their life cycle. That's no longer true. Right now, high-stakes decisions are everywhere and in every business. High-stakes decisions show up in moments like whether to pivot your business, whether to commit to a major deal, whether to change out your leadership significantly, whether to invest or pull back. In itself, these are difficult and complex decisions. What turns them into high-stakes decisions is that they're typically combined these days with significant time pressure, with incomplete information, yet also information overload. They link back to real consequences. They're high stakes because they can make or break your business, or they involve the livelihood of many. And typically, there is lots and lots of stakeholders involved in this situation. And that's what turns a decision into a high stakes decision. And that's where it then also gets difficult. Most teams don't struggle because they don't understand the options, right? They struggle because the stakes are high enough that being wrong feels more dangerous than doing nothing. And so what happens is that we wait, we gather more information, we go through another cycle, we do a realignment, we have one more conversation. And in the meantime, the situation moves regardless or whether you do something, right? Something changes, the decision doesn't get made, but the world keeps moving along, and you're not addressing the issue for which the decision needs making. You're in decision paralysis, or at least in a significant slowdown. And in high-stakes situations, that slowdown is not something you can afford. So, let's talk about the process. What's the tools that we can deploy here? Most of you know that I use the Stanford decision model as a base, right? And that's my go-to, and that's the one that I tell you to go check out if you don't have any. That's the one that has the 6 steps: frame the decision, look at the alternatives, gather relevant information, think about the trade-offs, apply logic and check your logic, and then commit to action. And it's a great model. But in high-stakes situations, working through it the way it's set up is too slow. It's also potentially too focused on completeness and on the quality side of the decision-making, which I find in these high-stakes situations, not suitable. Because in the real world, the world keeps moving in parallel to you trying to make that decision. And so you don't have the full information. I think we never had. I think we have more information. I think not having full or all the information is very common in decision making in business. But in these high stakes situations, there is typically more inherent risk and more things that remain currently unknown and unclear or uncertain. The bigger factor is that you really don't have unlimited time. And so you don't have the luxury of trying to go as complete as possible or as broad as possible. And so what I'm going to walk you through is an updated high stakes decision protocol that I use in practice and that helps me in these situations, or that I use with clients in these situations. And it's pulling elements from disaster response and from real world decision environments into this concept, into this space, right? So 7 steps in this protocol. Let's start with 1. Step one, I call triage. We're in a business emergency room. If we're doing high stakes decision making and we're stuck somewhere in that process, the first thing to do is triage. What I want you to do is think about the decision like an emergency room doctor would. Before we move into the process of what is it we're trying to decide and where do we have blind spot and where do we have issues and misalignment, I want to take you back to what is it that you're actually trying to decide. Because what I see all the time, by the time that I get invited into the room, that the teams are actually working a mix of what's by now 3 or 4 decisions. So maybe in a very simple example that you maybe can think of in your family life is when one of the partners has decided and told the other partner that they want to go shopping for new seating for the living room. And by the time you finally have found an afternoon to go to the store a couple of weeks later, one of the partners still thinks that they're there to make decisions around new seating, only to find out that by then the other partner has moved on to the space of a complete overhaul of the living room and is looking at the decision around new seating in the context of a different look for and feel for the room altogether, and some codependent decisions on paint colors and whatnot. And that's a funny example that we maybe all recognize, but that's what happens, right? We think that the main decision is this, but in the discussions there is other decisions that keep on being brought into the mix that soup up the conversation, that muddle the waters. And so we need to go back and say, what is it? What is the main decision we're trying to make? And let's put those other ones outside the room. We need to strip it back. What's the one we need to make today? And is it still formulated the same way? Because in the work we've done or in the time we've taken to mull this over, has there been changes, right? Are we still talking about last month's version of what the decision needs to be? Are we now working with outdated assumptions because we know certain things better, or some things are no longer an option, or some parts have been decided for us because the world has moved on? So what has changed? What do we know? And what are we assuming because we don't know? So let's make sure we trim it back to the basics. And don't bring in stuff in the conversation that's not relevant because it's at a different scale, or it's something that you can address after you've made this core decision. Yes, if you are making a decision about a new major partnership with company A and you somewhere in the business do for a very small piece of work some business with a competitor of A, company B, that's probably going to matter to some extent. But as long as you figured out that that doesn't preclude you from talking to partner A, you can figure out later, if you do decide that you enter in this partnership with company A, what needs tweaking on that small contract or agreement, if anything, or if there's anything that needs communicating with party B. Let's not bring that into the main decision. That's an after. You only need to deal with that if you actually make that first decision. So it doesn't need to be in the room today. Yeah. Then very important, we need a timeline, right? By when do we need to decide? What's this timeline based on? And be honest, what happens if we don't decide, right? Do we have clarity for the people around the table how much money we're losing daily because we're not making this decision? What is the value loss, right? And yeah, if you have 3 months left of runway, that doesn't mean you have 3 months to make a decision. That means you need to make a decision ASAP, because you also still need to implement it. And the turnabout, right? You need to think of your organization as a large ship. Once you've made the decision to change course and know finally what your new heading is, it takes a bit of time to achieve that new track, right? So we need time. It cannot be no time. You cannot, I'm not suggesting that you should be able to make a decision within 24 hours, but I'm all in favor of putting a decision in there. That's pretty fast, right? And so a week, 10 days, yeah, that's doable. If you have 3 weeks, that would be great, but you might not, right? Put a timeline in there and know why. So that's step one. Let's triage. We've stripped it down to the actual decision that we need to make. and what we know about it today based on today's facts and data. Then in step 2, I want you to set the decision arena. Just like in an operating theater or in an emergency room, or if you go into a disaster recovery team, of course, these roles are predefined and they're also pre-resourced, right? There is a crew that shows up in the emergency room and that's available every day. And there is a roster. And so a new patient comes in and they go to room 2 or room 3 or whatever. And then there's people assigned who are the first ones to go in after them and etc. And so this is literally the same thing. I want you to very quickly, now you know what is decision, have a look at your team. Who are the core people who need to be involved in the reasoning and the thinking through the decision? So this is not necessarily the people who will do the work. Who are the main people who need to be part of the conversations and the discussions? And so if this is about a new market, then you need your operational folks, you need your strategy people, you need your sales and marketing people who have the financial information. And I don't want you to have much duplicity in the room. I don't want you to double up on these functions. I want you to have representatives who can, if you're now taking 10 days or however much time you're taking to make this decision, let's say it's 10 days, I want these people to have the time to come in once a day or once every other day and spend 90 minutes, getting together and working through where you're at that stage. There is other people that in between can do the bulk of the work. I do think you also want somebody at that table who is kind of the integrator, who maybe is working this challenge somewhat full-time in a coordinating role, somebody who is kind of the custodian of the integration and the collective. I also don't think that you should try to minimize the number of people involved as much as possible. I don't believe in that at all, particularly if speed is of the essence. You need representation. And if in doubt, more representation is better, because that's your way to catch the inconsistencies in your assumptions. This is to catch that decisions made in one side of the organization that you maybe don't realize do really impact other sides of the organizations, and having the ability to flag that. So I do think more eyes on the integrated picture helps if you set the right rules. And the rules are simple. You need consistency on who that person is. So for 90% of the time, it needs to be the same person showing up. You cannot have rotating members from the teams who were part of yesterday's discussion, then come to today's discussion and missing all that background and context. You don't have time for that. So you need them to be able to attend consistently, and then you need to have some rules on how you work together, right? So people should not be talking for the sake of talking. You contribute with work or knowledge since the last time you connected. If there is work or analysis or input that needs to go in, then you report out on that. You speak up. Everybody around the table speaks up when something doesn't make sense or is disconnected, or to call out conflicting logic or assumptions or things from the arena or the area that you represent that others need to know, right? So you contribute the information everybody needs to know. We are not interested in the type of discussions around the very specific definition of a very specific shade of light blue, right? It needs to be in the context of, does it matter for the decision we're trying to make? And if you have some diligence in how you operate as a team, that group can be rather large, and I think that can be helpful. So step 2 is setting up that arena. Then step 3 is the alternatives. Now, normally when you talk about decision quality, you want your alternatives, so the choices that you're going to evaluate or that you're looking at, to be somewhat mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive. You do not have time for that. So we're going to diverge quite drastically from the classic model here, because we're not going for completeness. You probably already have something on the table. When I come in, you're typically already working alternatives, or you already know what the alternatives are. And if it's a high stakes decision, there is typically maybe only 2, maybe 3 real options, right? That's it. And doing nothing is not an option here, right? In high stakes decision, the status quo is not an option. If we are looking at entering a new market, let's assume here that you're looking at that because basically you need more growth, or you need more income, or you need more than what you currently have to sustain your business. So then the option is, do I go? And you're probably looking at a very specific market driven by a very specific development or a very specific opportunity you have on that table. So then we're now not also going to evaluate, if not this market, what other markets could we get into? There is a time-driven issue here, right? And there is something specifically why you're looking now at this market. So the real options on the table are probably, are we going now in this market because of X, Y, or Z? Or the other option, are we throwing more money for now at the markets that we're already in to find some near-term growth in those to get to the growth we need, and to buy us time to maybe make a different decision later, but to offset not now going into this new market because of X, Y, or Z. So there's really only 2 options right there, right now to evaluate. And I don't want you to add a whole lot of, there's probably all sorts of other things you could do, but there's a reason you've not done them, because those are not options you've been looking at in depth lately. So to under time constraint, add all these things now is not realistic. The current right now decision is are we doing this particular new market entry, yes or no, right? Or are we addressing this particularly key personnel issue, yes or no? So the alternatives should be a pretty short list. That's step 3. Step 4. This is important. This is where we talk about information, but what I really call this is the de-risking. Basically, what I want you to do is do some kind of old-fashioned spreadsheet or table maneuver, right? Put the 2 options side by side and then add all the information that you know about them. And you do want to try and make it somewhat apples to apples. That's not necessarily possible, but I want you to put a label on the side and then populate the cells for each of these options, say, okay, financial projections or higher new hire needs, right? So for instance, for option A, we only would need to hire 1 resource. For option B, we probably would need to hire 10 additional resources, whatever it is. Try as much as possible here for completeness in terms of what you either know or what you assumed, right? And you can maybe color code it or whatever. You can put in these cells what you're currently assuming around these options because you don't know. So once you've thrown all that on the board, this is where the team comes in, right? And then I want you to look at what you know about both of these options side by side and now say, okay, currently we cannot decide between those 2 or 3 because this looks too scary. We don't know anything about this. We have a huge blind spot here. The risk associated with this bit or this bit or this bit is too undefined. That's what's going to drive your work. So what you're going to do is pick up or make a list of, let's say, the 5 or 10 things that are the biggest unknowns or blind spots on the definition of those alternatives. And that's the work you're taking away. That's the work you're going to spend some effort on. And that doesn't have to be the people in the room. The intent is to de-risk it, right? So you can probably give some very specific and clear assignments to somebody else to do the work. So if you're looking at a supplier or an unknown entity and you want some financial analysis work done on them, or you say, well, there is a different partner behind this company, and so them we know some stuff about, but they're attached to somebody we know little about. You can just go to your analyst and say, hey, can you in the next 24 or 48 hours, whatever your deadline or your turn back time is, dig into this company and tell me if that would be a safe enough, or is that a financially stable enough company that we could do business with? And you don't need to know the finite detail of whether they are financially very healthy or just financially healthy, probably. But you do need to know if the verdict is financially mediocre state, right? Medium risk versus low risk. So you just need an order of magnitude level answer. And so don't ask for everything. Ask for a verdict or a very specific piece of information that you would like to know, and tell them to come back with the best possible information or answer they can give you in 24 or 48 hours. And this is also where AI can really help, right? Because you can run way more scenarios, you can challenge assumptions, you can also put the descriptions of your two concepts through the motions and say, where are the blind spots that you see, the risk that you see, how could we potentially go after some of this information or close the gaps in what we know or don't know? So it helps you potentially move a little faster. I do not want you to decide to then increase the list because of it to 20 things you're going to look into, right? Because yes, you could look into all sorts of things. I want you to agree as a team, what are the things that will actually mature our thinking and our decision making, right? What will actually help us move the needle and get us more comfortable with either option, more comfortable than we are today. So that's step 4, the de-risking. And we're going to repeat step 4 because step 5 is a divergence-convergence cycle. What I want you to do is set up an iteration. So I suggested that you kick off some work on 5 to 10 pieces of information you're going to dig out. You come back after 24, 36, 48 hours, put together what you've learned, look at the new and updated integrated version and say, okay, now we know all this and have all this. What else? And you do a second cycle and you do a third. I think by then, something should be starting to float to the top. But in these short cycles, it forces you to not go too wide or go off on all sorts of tangents. It's also a good fast cycle because it's likely that out of the 10 things that you set out to find out, one of them is actually not so easily solvable or is really a very subjective issue or whatever. Okay, so now you know that, right? That is a subject that you simply cannot find out more information about. Is there then other things you want more information around? Or does that mean that you need to add different assumptions to your concept, right? Does that mean that you need to assume that you're going to have to throw more people at it later, or that you're going to have to put some more insurance in place, and hence you're going to have to add some numbers to the bottom line valuation of that choice, right? That's things you can do. So you need these cycles to be short. You come back, you figure out how that now changes how you think about things and what else to go after. We want short cycles, we want a rhythm, we want consistency in the people involved in those conversations. And as I said, by the second or third cycle, something else needs to start to happen. And that's step 6. What I want you then to start thinking about, now that you've started to see some information around risks, etc., is the triggers and the reversibility. So basically, now that we have some more meat on the bone on these alternatives, I also want you to start thinking about the fact that there is a lot of stuff about these options that you don't know. So if you would now choose option A, the way it's defined today and what you know about it today, where or when would you start seeing that certain risk associated with it is starting to pan out, or that option starts to derail a little bit, or that option or that path that you chose needs some course correction? When will that start showing up? How will that start showing up? Is there something there that you can do to have that recognition sooner, right? And thinking through that will help you think what else you might want to actually look at in that third cycle. The main thing about this, though, which is so miraculous, is that this is where the fear leaves the room. If you start to think about, because typically by a second cycle, third cycle, there's also some frustration saying, hey, we still don't know this, or we will never know this. And that's true, right? But if you now start talking through it saying, okay, we will never know this. So let's talk about the control we do have. What would we do if this pans out or that pan out? People realize that there's so much options to course correct in that journey, right? And that there's so much control you do have if you plan for it. So you can make a decision and adjust. And in that conversation, you'll typically find that there is actually a clear solution, that one of these options starts to look a lot better than the other. And so it's time to make a decision and move. And if you think you're there and it feels like that intuitively, I would say you are there. Don't do another cycle. Basically start putting the pitch deck together that talks you through the work you did and that led to the conclusion and the proposal to the board or whoever is the one who hammers the final decision through. Because in the process of putting that decision logic and that narrative together, you will dig out the last few details that you might need to really pitch that. So I don't think that sets up another cycle. I think the last cycle is really to put the decision pack together and use that triggers example, right? So use what you've defined in terms of what are the outs and what are the signals when something starts to derail, so that those who now actually need to put the journey in motion can prepare adequately, right? And have the value of all the thinking and around the risks and opportunities associated with this option already there. And also lay out what the next decisions are that will need to be made subsequently. And I doubt very, very many of those will be high stakes. They are of a different, more operational decision-making nature typically. Let me very quickly walk you through a brief example to make this very concrete. So let's say you're a manufacturer in the US. You've been sourcing critical parts from China. Supply is unstable, prices are volatile, performance is dropping. And now there is a Mexican player that you've known very little about who's approached you because they have capacity that actually would solve your problem if you would switch over to them. But you have limited decision-making time because they also want to make the offer to somebody else. So the decision today, stripped back, is not, we need an alternative supplier. You probably do, but you've not done the work because you're still with the one that isn't quite working. The decision today is just, do we switch to this Mexican supplier or not, right? You set your team. You narrow the options down to just that. Fix the current setup enough to buy time to actually get serious about finding alternative supply. Or can I not throw enough money at the current situation to get it to buy myself time, and is switching to this entity with what I can find about it within the next 10 days a smarter and better solution for my business? So you gather targeted data around cost ranges, reliability, real world feedback about this other supplier, how much the changeover might take in terms of time and people, how soon, how well that would work, etc. How many extra people you might need to throw at it, or some other security measures you might need to put in place. And you can use AI to pressure test some of your assumptions and sanity check your scenarios here. You run a few sort cycles, define your triggers by when, if I throw more money at my current situation, by when should I be able to see that improvement? And is that fast enough? Do I have an out with the new supplier? Or will we, how can we quality control what we're getting from them? Or how can we make sure that the startup with a new supplier is as fast or as easy as possible or as smooth as possible, so that when things start to not go so well, we can course correct very quickly, etc. Have that conversation too. What is the stuff that you control about the things that are risky? And very quickly, one option will become the lesser of the two evils. And then as soon as one is the lesser of the two evils, because neither is ideal, because it's not ideal to make this kind of a decision under this much pressure this quick. but one of them will be the lesser of the two evils and will feel less scary and smarter. And so pick that one. And then the question becomes, how do we make that option work? Because you can make it work. You can make most things work, but one will be easier to make work than the other. So in closing, high stakes decisions don't get easier with more time. You do not need more time. You do not need to sit on it longer. You do not need to go for more completeness. High stakes decisions get just more expensive if you spend more time on them. And the goal is not a perfect decision. It's a decision that you can move on. A decision you can move on today and then adjust fast. And if you're sitting on one of those decisions right now, don't drift. If you're in the middle of a decision like this and it's not moving, that's exactly where I get pulled in. So please reach out. I'll help you cut through it and I'll get the decision that you can actually move on today or ASAP. Thanks for tuning in. Hope to have you back at the next episode of the Business Emergency Room. That's it for this episode of the Business Emergency Room. If you are currently dealing with chaos or disruption in your business, please reach out. You can email, text, or call, and I will find a way to connect with you within 24 hours. I've helped others steer out of the storm, and I know I can help you too. Talk soon. Please like, subscribe, and share.